Hello, and welcome to Mentor Dino. I'm your host, Caitlin Rossier. I am an architect and founder of Mentor Dino. I firmly believe that architecture, engineering, and construction professionals can achieve true success by embracing human skills as their guiding principle. So each week, I interview amazing professionals in and around the AEC industry as a way to share stories, inspiration, and advice for others finding their own unique career path. Thank you to all of our current subscribers, and if you're new, we'd love to have you join our community. So if you like this episode, please do me a favor and hit subscribe, like, or leave a comment below. It really helps others be able to discover this resource and support them on their own career journey. So let's dive in. I really hope you enjoy this conversation. Welcome to the Mentor Dino podcast. I would like to welcome Jeff Pastva, architect and vice president of development at Scannapieco Development Corporation in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Thank you so much, Jeff, for taking the time to speak with me today.
Yes, thanks for having me. Good to be here.
So I always start out with the loaded question. If you don't mind introducing yourself to let my listeners know a little bit about your journey and how you ended up to where you are today.
Yeah, and I think my response in most of these is that, I feel like I've had two different kind of tracks. There's the career track, and then there's kind of the AIA kind of track, and they both have been important in my life. But career-wise, just started, graduate of Syracuse University, 2006. I think when I came out, some of my actually classmates and I didn't even want to do architecture. I think we were kind of ready to check out something else. And so we're kind of finding ourselves. So we kind of took jobs that were kind of low key. We didn't do some of the big name firms in New York City. I came back to Philadelphia. It's kind of my hometown. There weren't a lot of alums with me. So I kind of had to strike out on my own, make my own kind of way. Even though it was my hometown, I didn't really know a lot of people here. And so I felt I really had to start my network from scratch. And I think that's also been another path of my journey, is that I go places and I feel like, I act as if I don't know anybody, and I have to say, if I want to almost survive and I want to advance, I need to go out and make friends. I have to go out and make, connections. And so started kind of without sure what I was going to do. I still got into architecture, but didn't have that direction of what I wanted. But then about 2 years in, a firm called Haley Donovan, which is now Donovan Architecture, was just starting out. I knew a friend of a friend who said, hey, you want to interview here? And they were doing housing, and particularly affordable housing, which I had no experience doing, but it was the kind of thing I had an interest in. And so that was kind of the beginning of my housing journey, because I've really done housing ever since. In some form or another, and particularly affordable housing, which is kind of close to, my kind of genesis in architecture. And I did a lot of it it was a small firm where I was the first hire of two partners, just getting as much exposure to every part of the business, part of design. And we worked kind of out of the office of our biggest client, who was a real estate developer. And so I was constantly in this kind of environment of our clients, our contractors, because they built their own work, the subs, they would always walk into our office. And again, it's me, doing what would normally be just kind of say the grunt work or doing CDs, but because there's no one else to do anything else, I was kind of doing everything. So that kind of started both a real estate journey. Well, it wasn't in real estate yet. I think that was kind of planted a seed in what I saw, just this environment that I'm working with all the different players, and in real time, we could do value engineering, which, clearly is in architecture, it's a dirty word, or dirty phrase. But I think in that realm, when you are able to kind of on the fly design something that still meets the design intent, while picking a product or a design feature that still kind of comes down in price. That's the kind of thing, as an example, with if the architect was totally cut out, when you show up on site the next time and like they just totally butchered your design and you had no power to make the change, like this is one of those few things I felt we had agency over, because we're there, because we could tell them that looks bad. Let's appeal to the owner again at the same time as the contractor about why something should be done and done correctly. So it's a little bit in the weeds. I know that you've asked for an overview, and this is kind of diving into like very specifics. But I think that some of those things have really fueled my interest in the real estate, which again, I wasn't even thinking about doing this path, but I think that was like, again, kind of like the germination of some of that. So kind of fast forward, I started, I started, I don't want to say call it bounce around, but, it was working at a couple different firms, almost, housing was still kind of my kind of expertise. And so it started primarily with affordable housing, with kind of like which was like a model of like a 40 unit, either townhomes or like a one, kind of single building, but like the size and scale was pretty much the same for almost every project I was doing for the first couple of years. Then I jumped up to doing more market rate, kind of, the other kind of spectrum, not totally luxury, but things that were more like the 300 to 400 units, more suburban in some cases, more amenitized. So it's just a different crowd. Something still was interesting. It was a big learning experience to learn different construction types. Again, when everything was kind of 5A construction, you try to like do everything you could to stay within 4 stories, 40 units. Now it's like, how do we build the biggest thing we can, in like kind of a 5/1 podium style, for those that are familiar with that kind of term. So I started getting more kind of exposure to these different types, and along the way, still doing a lot of CET. That becomes a kind of thread in my career. Went into a firm that was doing a lot of passive house. So almost kind of back to smaller scale, because the passive house is still primarily used, I would call it, in like a single family home environment, duplexes, triplexes. And that's a lot what I was doing. So like just smaller scale, private clients, scaling up a little bit. It was so hard to get bigger clients to take on like a 25, 50 unit passive house in the Philadelphia area. So kind of honed the craft more like single family duplexes, that level. So again, kind of adding another kind of accreditation and credential and kind of skill set to my kind of housing arsenal. And so that led to when Scannapieco was hiring for someone to be more of an in-house kind of architect. That was like kind of the role I was brought in, call it. They were looking for someone who had housing experience, who had CA experience, and in particular, the larger projects. I was the one, while at the time it felt like such a slog, I was the one doing like soup to nuts, all the submittals, all the RFIs. I was the guy in the field, and I had 2 projects that were 300 some units at the time. And so that was my day for 2 years, where, it seemed like I would go to the one job site on Monday, and I would spend like the rest of the week responding to the RFIs from that one meeting. And then the following week I go to the next job site, and it would just cycle over again. So, but that all kind of paid off when now I'm in my position, starting as, someone they wanted to be in the field, call it owner's rep, call it in-house architect is like the beginning. But, managing the design teams, managing the contractor, but primarily being there in the field and making sure that the oversight is there. So I kind of was really able to have these transferable skills, which is something that we've talked about a lot in YF, I'll say. Something I kind of focus on in my tenure at Connection, which I guess I'll get to is the second part of this more long-winded introduction, was that there was a period where we were looking at like, how do we give, and I think the YF still does this a little bit about their different business models, but what are some of the other skill sets that architects can use that are inherent to what we learned, whether it's design thinking or other, and either have some sort of alternative path career, which I find myself in, right? I'm not in traditional practice anymore. I don't know if and it never felt like I was leaving it for a certain reason, but when I saw the opportunities and I said, I can still feel like I'm doing architecture, but just not the ones designing the buildings. I'm doing so many of the other things that is adjacent to the built environment, but I might even have more control. It just seemed like the natural fit.
Yeah.
So
And
that's kind of the career.
you
Yeah,
did
go
so
ahead.
much CA in general, so like you were already boots on the ground on a regular basis anyway. So like just hearing the story, I don't feel like the day to day really changed that much for what you were doing in a firm versus the
It
developer side. I'm sure nowadays it's
there, yeah.
transitioned even more, but when you first got pulled into it.
When I first got pulled in, it was very much things I felt like I was doing anyway. You know, as an architect, you know, on the CA kind of side. Um, and interesting enough, like, I mean, I guess having that experience that usually I was like CAing my own drawings. And so like there was a little bit of like a weirdness where I'm not, you know, I can't point and I don't know the drawings well enough when I'm first brought in the way that I would have known it before, because the way that my track worked, and this isn't, I think some people's experience is different, but it almost seemed like almost every project that I touched, you know, especially at the small firm level, I was doing that design development through CA. Like I would see the entire arc of my kind of project. And so I could very well defend, and I knew my details inside and out because I'm the one who drew them. And this is one of the first times where I had to go in and understand what someone else did and interpret it. And kind of, I'd have to fill in the gaps a little bit. But I knew what to look for. I knew when they cut corners. I knew when they might not have done it clear enough. But I would then have to ad lib and say, well, this is what they meant, and almost interpret the drawing in a way that I think wouldn't have been interpreted favorably if I wasn't. Because the architects also can't be on site as much. Like we're in a business where architects can't charge appropriately for the amount of CA that's probably necessary to really see a job through, right? You always hear CA is a money loser, and you try to do as little as possible on the business side. But in reality, I was even, I don't want to say shocked, but even like one of the first big projects I was on the development side, I kind of felt like if I wasn't on site 2 to 3 times a week, like this thing would go off the rails. And we couldn't always have the architect on site. You know, they were still only coming out once every other week. Like so many things would happen in a 2-week time period. Yes, you can have phone calls. Yes, you can have sketches. But if you weren't there looking at things with them, a lot of decisions would be made in their absence. And so I think the project benefited from having someone like myself on site much more often. And so
Yeah.
again, some more reinforcement about why I think that, you know, whether this is a career advice piece, but you know, if you are in that kind of realm and you've seen different pieces of it, particularly construction, I think that there are avenues to take the skills you have as an architect and be in the field more with other, you know, owners. I think owners rep like jobs are kind of on the rise. And, you know, in Philadelphia, there's a couple firms that I think have started to make a name, and they hire, I don't want to say exclusive architects, but like they almost look for architects or people with that kind of design background. You know, Becker Frondorf is one that is a firm. I don't think they have much footprint outside of Philadelphia, but like 10 years ago, I wouldn't have heard of them. And now there's a couple other ones. There's one called, you know, Watchdog Project Management. There's a couple of other ones that are more like, again, these owner reps that are making a name for kind of filling these gaps where, you know, the owners still want to pay for someone to be on site, but they might not want to pay the architecture firm, but architects are the ones doing that job.
Yeah. I feel like architects need to just put it on as another ad service to, hey, if there's additional need for somebody to be there, you know, I think it's a last opportunity that architects could make a profit on it if CM world is going up. But
if you pitched it, if you pitched it more
good.
as that CM as your, I think that is the part that kind of gets just, if you just look at the way that like there's profit margins in construction, CM is technically like a very specialized thing where you're almost managing the GC. So it does take a special skill set to still be in there, making sure the GC is doing the right things. But that is a lot of what I'm doing. And so I think architects could have that skill set as a way to, it's a personality thing. Like, it's still with personalities, right? Like being a GC is not easy. But if you're able to like find a way to like manage them, and so the owner doesn't have to, that's another kind of pathway into, kind of what I do, but also what others, could be as a separate business model.
Yeah. And I've seen, like, looking back at my career, I'm more in CA than I am in design for the most part. And just getting over my first project that wasn't local, it was hard only getting on site once a month, sometimes twice a month, and not being, I'm used to local projects where, the GC can call me, and I've had a project I could walk to the site. I could bike to the site. So, hey, you need me? Okay, I'll be there in an hour. Let me finish this up and go. Whereas when there's flights and stuff involved, you can't react as quickly to things that, it's just sometimes easier just to be in the field and see it and have that conversation with the contractor on, here's the design intent. What do you want to do? And see if there's some kind of equal medium that, like, okay, if I can't get the full design intent, here's where the client's concerns are. Now that you understand the concerns, what approach to take it. And it's a lot easier to do that standing next to them in the field and seeing it. I've even sat on the floor on a job site and started sketching or pulling out my laptop. I'm like, I'm going to figure this out right now while I'm here, because I did have that luxury when I had to fly. I'm like, nope, I'm going to be here, and I'm going to be here for 3 days in a row when I do get up there. So then I could just be there and people could pull me and ask questions. Like, my days on site were so busy, but we got so much done in such a quick manner. That's important. I did have a small question, since I don't typically do housing. What is the 5/1 podium style mean?
So, and I think that it's more of like it's kind of a pariah of housing now, I guess, is that, the building code has these different, ways you can just get more density out of wood construction, right? So, and it's even gotten bigger now with 2018. I'm not in 21, like Pennsylvania's not in 21 code, so I don't know 21 code very well yet. So I don't know what the next iteration is other than mass timber. But traditionally wood housing, you can do 4 stories, generally. And then if you do non-fire rated type of wood, if you go to fire rated, so you have the actual studs and the plywood, called FRT or FRTW, fire retardant treated wood. If you build all of your exterior shell in FRT, you can build 5 stories because they consider that a non-combustible type of wood. If you want to get another story, you can either do 4 or 5, right? If you do 4 over a concrete podium or a steel podium and you have a 3-hour rating kind of at the horizontal assembly, you can do non-fire rated 4 stories over 1. Or if you do the same fire rated wood, you can do 5 stories of wood over this 3-hour kind of shell. And now that the 2018 code allows you to actually build 2 levels of podium, so that you actually can get 5 over 2. So there's a couple of these things, but it's become like just a way to get as much density. Particularly, it was more of a suburban thing. Like I think that it started more in like South Carolina, North Carolina, that like the Southeast, Texas, Midwest. And urban infill wasn't really doing it a lot because particularly these things like New York City, I don't think you're even allowed to use wood of any type, in New York. That's not the case for Philly, but I think but Philly, like a lot, the sites were so tight. If you want to build in Center City, you have to build concrete. because you got to go up 15 stories, right? So but now that more land is opening up in Philadelphia, like larger kind of post-industrial plots on the periphery, you have parcels that are big enough. You're not going to build a skyscraper there, but you need to get, again, as much density as you can out of an acre. So that's where you get a 5/1.
No, that makes sense.
You need a certain amount of space. Like you kind of need this, like a 70-foot wide site to get, double it a corridor to get your max density.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that makes sense. They've done a lot of development over in the East Liberty neighborhood of Pittsburgh, and going over there is a lot of that 5/1 style. Like I've gone over there to go to restaurants and stuff and seeing the development over there, and that is how some of those have been set up, and they have the plots of land to be able to get that space around them too. So I know exactly what you're talking about now that I understand it, which is always fun. Now I can go to development areas and I understand like the components on why they did certain things. So,
but they get boxy. Yeah. I think that's the why people don't like them, is that they say because of the building code, whether that's the reason or not, people are saying like, the kind of inspiration and the style and the kind of design flexibility has gone down, and people are just building these kind of like solid, massive, block sized buildings, again, to get your density. And there's very little you can do to dress it up without spending more money. So they don't get a great reputation in the press, like, the architectural critic press.
I'd still rather see that than the copy paste cookie cutter suburban homes. Like I feel like that bothers me more than the boxes, but I understand the boxes aren't that high design, glamorous buildings that win the design awards sometimes. But
there's still other ways. There are still ways to dress them up. You just have to have a good architect.
And I know you mentioned being the first hire for 2 partners. Do you have any advice for someone starting out their career in a small firm where they're going to be wearing so many hats?
I mean, a lot of it probably just some of it's personality, I would say, and just being able to like be flexible. I mean, I've seen people not necessarily in that position, because again, everybody who was, as I was part of the growth of the firm, like I think everybody knew was coming in could do lots of things, right? And so you have to be able to have multiple skills. You have to be able to like say yes, like it's not like, no, that's not my job type of thing, or no, I can't do that. It's like if someone asks you to do it, you figure it out. That sounds like intuitive, but I mean, you kind of have to have that mentality going in that like if someone asks you to do something, you can't say no. I mean, within reason, right? Like, but if it's like, hey, we need to, getting it, like staying away from like workplace culture. I mean, like I didn't get into like a situation where I felt I ever had to work like 80, 100 hours because of being in a small firm. I think that I was lucky to be in a position where they respected that even before having a family at that time, they weren't expecting me to like always do stuff because there was no one else to do the work. So that, you are able to push back if that's where you're finding yourself, I believe. But you also build your clout by figuring things out. You can't, again, if it's, I think I even came in, I didn't know any 3D programs. Well, like, so like, Revit was around when I started there, but we actually used ArchiCAD. And so that was a program that I had no training in, and they didn't have time to teach me. I just had to figure it out myself and figure out how to do renderings in ArchiCAD, figure out, but even like the basics of drawing in it and documenting in it was something I kind of had to figure out on the fly. So that's the kind of stuff. So you just have to be able to be, nimble, facile. If you don't know it, figure it out. That's the kind of thing you might do in your own time. Like, hey, I got to take some tutorials. I got to do this. you don't always have time to sit and have someone teach you. You just got to figure it out. So I think that mentality helped me a lot. And I would say don't waste the opportunity that if you're in a small firm, I think one of the benefits that I had was that I heard every conversation. Don't just put your headphones on and do your work. It's like, even if I'm not engaging in it, the fact that I heard everything that was happening, I just felt like I knew so much more than some of my peers do, who, I knew were like doing like stair and bathroom. Like that's like a joke. But people would do that. They would spend their first couple of years out of school, like just doing bathroom details if you were in a really large firm. And I know that you can get pigeonholed and people can say, oh, you're the guy that knows how to like detail a stair and Revit really well. So I'm going to just give you every stair for the next 2 years. So I think there's opportunities to then, again, hear those things, have leadership. And then once someone else comes in, if you're able to like mentor them, it gives you your own leadership kind of path. So I think that looking back, that's a quick thing that I could, I give advice to. I would also say, while I can't say I actually made this path, but I think that it was always my intention that if you're in a small firm, if you can bring in a couple of clients, that will be that's the kind of thing that I think that is, in any business, like if you can bring in revenue, that's the kind of thing that puts you on a partner track, right? You become indispensable if you can bring home contracts. So I always felt like I only brought in a couple here and there all my career, so it wasn't my forte. But if you can do that, and you have partners who are working for a small firm who's willing to give you that flexibility and to either go on those kind of client calls or to go out there and kind of bring someone in, to me that's kind of a fast track way to become a partner in that firm, because you're at the ground floor, right? So they want you to, for a certain reason, if you can go out and get some clients, you could be that third name partner,
Yeah. You never know where it can take you.
Yeah.
At that point. Now, what's your day-to-day like as a VP on the development side? How is that different than architecture, or what you first started when they first brought you on board? Is there a big difference?
I mean, I wouldn't say it's a big difference, but it's still, I think of me as kind of like the client contact. So anytime that if you've had a real estate developer as your client, instead of you calling the developer directly, who may or may not understand anything you're saying about the details, I'm that first part. I'm the person who's talking to every design professional. I'm in all those conversations. I'm interpreting as necessary, but a lot of times I'm the one like making decisions. They tell me what they want to do, and I am the one who approves it. Or if I have to get my own approval about something that's going to cost money, I'll run it up. But a lot of I'm making a lot of decisions day to day, so it doesn't have to kind of keep going up and have the principals in the firm bothered about smaller design decisions. So I would say that's a lot of what I kind of do now. I mean, depending on the cycle, right? So I will say that just like an architectural project cycle, where you go, sometimes you're in design, sometimes you're in CD, sometimes you're in CA, sometimes you're in proposal mode. We have the same kind of cycle. So right now I'm kind of finishing up a lot of like the stuff that's in construction, but then the next phase will be more going and scouting sites, for the next project. Then, it's hiring the teams. Then it's, starting to do the actual design. So it's like programming. So I'm the one helping to program what we want to do. I might do some feasibility studies before we hire even another architect to say how many, whatever it is. I mean, I do mostly residential, but, so I can say how many, units can we fit with or without a variance. So I will do some of that kind of front end design work, because that was another thing that I did a lot of. If I wasn't doing CA and I wasn't doing CDs, I feel like I was doing a lot of feasibility studies, as an architect, towards, maybe not necessarily towards the end of like kind of architect path, like before kind of, I would say not, I could say post, architecture, but that kind of end of that phase, lots of clients were coming in, and that they were the type that were doing lots of smaller projects. And so there was like a quick turnaround, but they needed a lot of feasibility studies of like, what can we do and what we do by right in particular. So I got really good at like the zoning code of Philadelphia, and the building code, and knowing like how those two things play off. A lot of the work I was doing in the last architecture firm and now real estate firm is in Philadelphia. So knowing those kind of codes, hopefully that doesn't get replaced by AI, but I think that there's still value in like having quick recall about what are the parameters that I can work with, and how do I, maximize the design, and the income potential of any project.
Yeah, I think it's always going to be important because not everyone's going to search it, and the accuracy of AI in the AEC industry isn't there yet. So I think we still have some time where our own brains are going to be the better power for a while.
Yeah, I hope so.
Yeah. But I want to switch over to your involvement with the AIA and mentorship. Can you explain some of the roles you've had within the AIA and AIA adjacent?
Yeah, so this might have even been like one of the opening questions, but I think we get there eventually. Is that, and I think one of the things I did kind of mention that I think if I look back, really informed how I got involved, in that I felt like I had to build my network from scratch. And so, first couple of years, I didn't do as much with like the associates level, but I had benefited from kind of AI Philadelphia was doing some area study sessions kind of when I was studying for my tests. And like the minute that we'll say a couple, I didn't take a big hiatus. Like some people, pass their tests and they go on to the next thing. I think I might have taken like a couple months off and then said, all right, well, how do I kind of get back? And so I hooked up with the person who was running them. Her name's Denise Thompson, and she was the co-chair. Well, she was the area study kind of group chair and kind of the chair of the local YF at the time. And she was running a lot of that by herself, as kind of like someone who had kind of restarted. I think like years ago, there was like a YF locally in Philadelphia, like the early 90s. And then kind of it went dormant for a little period. She brought it back around 2009. So she was really the first person to resurrect it, but doing a lot of it on her own. And so there was limited capacity that I don't want to say one person, because I think I did a lot when I was doing it a lot by myself, but like she had limited when she was doing it. She was doing like, maybe a program every quarter, type of thing, or event every quarter. But I wanted to get back. I said, you help me with my study sessions. Like if you had a second person doing this, what could you do? And she said, well, at the very least, we could have, sessions every other week, right? Instead of once a month, we can now run them every other week or something like that, and try to cover more ground. Or we could say that, having someone more recent, because I think she had taken an older version of the test. Now I had taken what was 4.0. I think I can't believe I'm not really remembering, but she was in 3.1, I think, and I was in 4.0. And so like now her knowledge was becoming less relevant to like the next kind of class of takers. So started like working with her, finding a way to like, kind of, again, giving back to what she had helped me do, but then how do we scale this up? And so that was my entree in. And then we said, well, all right, well now I'll architect, let's do some more other types of programming. And I just really started taking off. I mean, I just, between the two of us bouncing ideas off each other, just like, business partners. I think if you think about it, if you're starting your own farm, and I've even thought this and told people that like I probably wouldn't start my own firm. Like doing the things that I've done with AIA even has kind of given me this insight that like I enjoy and prefer to have like a partner in probably anything that I do, because as good as I think I might be in different areas, like I don't know everything, and I always like to bounce ideas off of. And so I think we started this rapport where we had different skill sets. She was in healthcare, I was in more like housing, so we knew different, kind of sides of kind of architecture and styles, and small firm, larger firm type of thing. So we had a very good dynamic. Just started running lots of programs at the local level. Anything, whether it's a happy hour, whether it's portfolio reviews, more study sessions. We started doing more, which I think was the first, and unfortunately it never really carried on, but we were doing some fellows and young architect events. That was something that the College of Fellows has traditionally had at the national level, a very strong relationship with the YEF, but it doesn't always trickle down to the local level. So we saw that disconnect, and we said, how do we do this? And we did have a series of events, but it didn't have the continuity. But we were always like, how do we keep something? How do we do something new? And we did a lot of kind of integrations or kind of sponsored events that just kind of hadn't, as far as I knew, hadn't been done before. So we wouldn't just do things with architects. We had an event with the American Composers Forum, because we found some common thread in music, and we said, architecture's frozen music. They said, let's do it. So we had like a design charrette with composers. We had a happy hour with some like makerspace places, like makerspaces and co-working spaces were just kind of starting out around that time. So we said, how do we kind of extend kind of the network to other design kind of fields? And we made some inroads there. We did more with like ULI and with AGC, which locally is called the GVCA. I think Pittsburgh, it's the Master Builders Association, I think is the counterpart. Yeah. So we were trying to find more young groups and saying like, how do we like get more collaboration, whether it's an event, an article, a charrette. We did a bunch of design charrettes. So like we were just like just trying to create as a lot of buzz, because at the time, and I think that there still was that, I think emerging professionals feel more heard now, but there wasn't a lot of focus on really anyone like under the age of 45 in AIA. And it was around like 2014. So this is, it was just kind of starting, but I think in like 13 or 14, after we had started doing some of this work, like AIA started pivoting to, how do we support kind of this next generation? And because we started laying some groundwork, we were kind of at the right time where we started getting tapped for other leadership positions. And so as she kind of, and this is maybe a piece of advice, like if you are in, whether it's AIA or, or in a firm, if you're able to find someone that maybe is just, there are mentors, but like if you in mentees relationships, but you find someone who's just maybe a couple of years older than you, as they kind of grow, if you can kind of ask on their coattails a little bit maybe and benefit, right? And so one could be like think about like if someone gets a promotion and you're the next person in line, well then you might get a promotion too, because one person got promoted up. Well, now it's your turn to kind of fill that kind of person who's just above you's role. And so I felt a little bit in the AIA world, Denise was elected to the board of directors in 2013, I think it was, or 2012 or 2013. And so she left a void to be the chair of the YF. And so as her co-chair, sometimes you can just be a co-chair for years, but because she was kind of advancing in her AI career, then I kind of filled like the next leadership role. And then I felt like I had an ally on the board, because now here's someone who I've worked with extensively, built that network, and now that person is on the board. It can advocate for me, if necessary, and I would advocate for her. And so that kind of started this kind of journey where like in YF, world, and probably in every AI chapter that's kind of maybe a medium size to a large city, like there are different things you can jump around to and find like that. What's the next role? Like how do you climb that next ladder? Not that I was ever considering myself like a corporate ladder climber, but like if you want to grow, I do think that sometimes it means like how do you get that next big role? And so, I went from kind of co-chair, understudy, call it, of the local YF to the chair of the committee. And then as my network grew and I had more friends on boards who could vouch for me or write letters for me, what's called the YARD position, which is now called the YAR, Young Architect Representative, which was representing this, at the time it was, it still is a single state region. So Pennsylvania still has one, but at the time there was like regions. So like one YAR or YARD was representing like 4 states sometimes. Pennsylvania had its own. So I was still competing against people from, say, Pittsburgh who wanted to do it. But again, I had people who were vouching for me and writing letters. And so when that position opened up, I already had someone saying, hey, you should do this. So people were kind of helping me like plot my path because I might not have known that was like a thing. She let me know. So I went from kind of local chair to YARD. And then once I was there, I had already been a little bit involved in Connection, which is kind of the magazine, the YF's magazine, e-magazine. I had actually kind of built a reputation with the leadership and the rest of the young architects, like regional directors, before I was one, because I was helping out kind of with Connection in 2013 concurrently with some of my YF local experience. And so this is just kind of like the spider webs of like, if you get involved in a lot of things and, even if you don't know where it's going, you kind of open doors to like, jump from one thing to the next, as opportunities present themselves. So, follow this path again. I had, I was in the YARD position, but the kind of term for the communications director on the YF kind of advisory committee was opening the following year. And because again, I was involved in Connection and continued my involvement, I had kind of risen to be kind of one of the kind of deputy editors, we'll call it, right? And so there was like 2 of us that were kind of at the same level. And so one of us was likely going to get it. So I actually didn't have to do a full kind of 2-year term as the YARD because this position opened up and I was able to kind of get into that. Again, all kind of aligned with my passions, all aligned with my skill sets, all aligned with like things that just made a lot of sense. And so very quickly, I would call it, went from kind of local chair to national advisory committee member, right? That was really like a 1-year difference between the two because I was so involved. So that was kind of that. And then I think from there, it was like, you kind of get more visibility and people start tapping you and asking you to do different things. So at the peak of my kind of involvement, at that point, I was asked to be on the Philadelphia board, the Pennsylvania board, and I was on the AdCom. So, I had kind of local, state, and national involvement all simultaneously. And so that just kind of really continues to spread like your influence and who you know when you go to when I say you go to conference, then, I know people at every single one of those levels, and generally the ones that are from national, the ones I might not see often. So I would use the time that I had to try to catch up with them for like 3 days that I would be there. So that's, kind of a long-winded thing maybe, but like, that's like a little bit of the arc, right? That's kind of how I got my start. It was like, and again, not unlike maybe being in a small business, is that like, I would say if I'm going to be the chair of this thing, I want this thing to be the most successful. I want people to like come to my events. And I'm again, it was 2 of us, but a lot of times, if Denise was doing one thing, like I might be responsible for like making flyers and promoting and getting people there. It's like, if I'm going to put all this effort into it, I need to make sure that, there's a critical mass of, say, 30 people. Like 30, to me, 30 people at an event was always a success. If we get 30 people and we would continue to get 30 people, like, at, once a month, we're getting people together for like different things. And so, if you're going to put yourself out there, like, really do it and figure it out. So I think that's kind of how it served me to get to the next thing. And every level, I would always like, what deliverable can I kind of put out? Like, what can I do? I don't want to just sit in this chair to say that I'm the chair of something or I'm the president of something. Like, I want outcomes to show that, like, in the time I had, I really want to look back and say, like, look at all the stuff that, we accomplished. So,
yeah, more than checking a box, but making a difference in the architect community.
Yeah. And hopefully having fun along the way. Like, I'm not doing these things because someone's twisting my arm. It's like, if someone, again, gives me, what is it that you want to do? And so maybe this is another, like, maybe a career point is like, you might be told what to do in your firm, but if you're doing a volunteer thing and people say, what do you want to do? Well, then I'll give you a little bit of, you might not get a lot of financial resources to do it. So if you're willing to, like, work with, $1,000 here, $500 there, whatever you can kind of scrap together. And if, I wouldn't say that I was the best fundraiser, but, like, if you can, fundraise and get some more money, that's the kind of thing that you can run the thing you want to do. So I thought it was important to run, and like portfolio reviews. I created an event we called Elevator Pitch. And the idea was that we would put, instead of having architects just like presenting their designs, it was like, well, and this was around the time Shark Tank was starting up. So I can't say I didn't take inspiration from that, but I said, pretend you are pitching your project to a group of investors or, a client. What is going to make this? So I had to tell people, like, take your designs, like, you can still take something, maybe your thesis, but pitch this as if someone's going to buy into it and tell them why they need to do that. And so we found ran a couple years in a row and said, and people, well, scared, like they like didn't know what to do. But I said, well, this is a skill that I think that is really valuable. So, I'll coach you. I'll give you, like, how I think you should do this. Not that I necessarily had the experience, but I felt, and this is kind of like part of, like, the thing of, like, making up as you go, maybe. But if you want to create something and then find people to, like, participate in it, like, you have to do the legwork. And so I felt in AIA, I've had that opportunity to say, if I want to create a program, I want to create, some sort of cause, or I want to, like, advance something that I think is missing, it's up to me to to do that. And others have done this with other, more pressing issue. I think that I'm talking about programming and maybe, like, mentoring career advancement, but a lot of other people have done this now with justice and climate and, EDI. I think that some of these programs did not exist just 5 years ago. And so people say, well, I want to do it. I want to start a women architecture group. I want to start a justice and inclusion group. I want to start a COAT. Maybe there isn't one in my chapter. And then you can tap into broader resources too, because both, national and state usually have something started. But you'd be surprised. Not every place has these things. So if you have a cause you're interested in and you have the time and talent to do it, to me, that's why I just really enjoyed being involved with AI in particular. It was that I want to help mentor people, but along the way, I think that if people say, hey, give me some ideas and then I'll support you to do it. To me, that's like any special project, right? Like, who else is telling that you can do that?
And I know I get a lot of questions from recent graduates and really young professionals asking me, why should I join the AIA? What would it do for me? Do you have advice that you usually give or comments back when you get those questions?
I mean, I actually don't feel like I've gotten a lot of that questions over the years, or that. I mean, I know it is a question, right? People are questioning. I don't know. They've always done. I mean, there might be some questions right now currently, but people have always said, like, why do this? Like, why should a firm support it, right? I haven't always had all my firms support it, so sometimes I had to, pay my own dues. But it's always easier if you have a firm that's at least splitting half of it, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, to me, it's still the network that at the I think it's harder in a big city. I mean, I think I would question it more if I was in a smaller chapter. Like, I think maybe if I was in, Lancaster and I didn't have like a critical mass of kind of colleagues who I could meet with, because you might only have like 10 or like it's a little bit bigger than that. But if you're some of these chapters,
we won't tell
really,
them.
yeah, some of these chapters, geographically are large, right? So if you look at Pennsylvania, the middle chapter, as it's called,
Mm-hmm.
goes from the New York State to the Maryland State border, and from Harrisburg to like Greensburg, right? And in that group, there's like 30 architects. It is very difficult to create like a network at this, what I would see the same value as being like in Philadelphia. So
Yeah, even Pittsburgh's smaller than Philly in terms of our chapters, and like we're not as small as Central, but there's still that, if I saw 30 people at an event in Pittsburgh, like that's some of the bigger events, whereas some of the smaller YAF events sometimes get smaller than that, but it's like, okay, there's still like a good collection, but then you kind of get to know people a little bit more at that level when it's smaller. But the committee options vary from chapter to chapter. Like, it wasn't until I started looking into what other chapters were doing that it's like, oh, we have a committee of that? Like, Pittsburgh doesn't have that. Should we have that? And it just starts a conversation when you start looking at it broader. But I know I always tell people the network side in terms of getting involved and just knowing people in your region, because you never know when you could need a letter of recommendation for some kind of scholarship or grant to go to a conference, or you get laid off. And if you're a young architect, your network may not be that big. You talked about moving to Philly. Like, you didn't have that many college classmates go to Philly, so you didn't have that network. Whereas if you need to pivot or move or change or just see what's going on in other firms to see how you're learning, it's a good way to meet people outside your office.
yeah, so I mean, I guess I could, again, what benefited me, I'll say, if we look at a couple of different things, one, starting at that small firm level and doing a lot of housing, I thought it was important to join the AIA. First it was to give back, but also like for me to expand my own kind of knowledge base about architecture. I'm doing a very small thing, and not that I was necessarily interested in healthcare design, but like if I wasn't going to other events and getting exposed to like different ideas, it could very well just be like doing the same thing in the same small kind of like mentality. And so I think, to me, that's a reason why I benefited. So I didn't always have to just be interested in like the day-to-day job, but I think there's also this leadership opportunities. Now, not everybody can be a leader. So in Philadelphia, you have a chapter of 1,500 people, give or take, members. They all can't be leaders of committees. But me personally, if I didn't have the opportunity to lead in my own firm, or I was involved in like a local civic association at the time, like I was searching out for ways to get more leadership experience. And AIA is a natural place, I think, for architects to do that. So whether if you were in AIS or some other, group, or you wanted to just say like, how do I find a way to gain leadership skills? And, I think that you don't know this type of stuff until you go out and you try to like, lead a group of people. Like if you're not doing it at your firm, like you can learn so much by like, again, doing marketing, doing, cold call. I mean, like I can't like, so I'm kind of going back locally, but what a lot of the things that I've done program wise required me to just call people, cold. I mean, it's cold. I mean, I might not have called them in the beginning. I think now I'm at a point that I will still cold call people if I want to like do something. If there's a person I want to invite to a panel, I will call them up and pitch. And I think the only reason I have that skill is because of the years I've spent doing an AIA and saying, if I want this thing to be successful, I got to find out how I get a certain contributor, a certain panelist. There's no one else going to do it for me, so I would do it. And I feel comfortable. I think that, especially if you look at, if we haven't even really touched on connection very much, but kind of the thing that was, I still consider my greatest kind of accomplishment was doing this, running this magazine for YF. And what I would say was keeping it to like, I'm going to say whether it's true or not, right? I always like to say, like, I think we were holding like very high journalistic standards, right? We were going after content that would be the same type of content that the AIA National could get. Sure, maybe they could get it more easy or could get it easier because, they just have the clout to do it. But I was getting contributors at that level that would be a feature article in Architect magazine. I think we were able to get those people to write something or to interview them. And again, the only reason we were doing that was because either me or someone else on my kind of editorial staff was out making those pitches and saying, well, why should I spend my time doing this? Well, this is why, right? This is who it's going to help. This is who's going to read it. This is why I think you should be part of it. We're doing an issue on climate change, resiliency this year, or this month. And so doing that pitching, I think, is the type of thing that, you have to go and give presentations. If I wasn't giving presentations in my work life, this was another way that I could expand and build that skill set. The next time someone asks me to do a presentation, I am ready for it because I have done so much kind of pitching and selling my ideas and trying to convince someone to do something, right?
Yeah, because there's so much you can do. And I even learn through podcasting. I generally just reach out to people. A lot of the times I don't know them ahead of time. And so it's reaching out to see if somebody will talk to me. And sometimes they're busy and sometimes it's, sure, I'll do it. Let's go for it. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I'm going to be talking to this person. So
yeah, so you probably experienced that, going through this now, is that, I think that sometimes it might not be as heavy a lift as you think it is until you ask, right? And then there's people who you might have to ask again. I don't think there are people that I really hounded, but there are people that I might have pursued who didn't have the time. I would, I'd follow up. I would let them go if unless they were truly saying like, no, I'm not interested. But if someone says I just can't do it this time around, they try to give you an excuse. Well, there's a salesmanship in this. It reminds me of a. Well, there's a couple of movies, but I don't know if you have ever seen the movie Boiler Room. Have you heard of that?
No, I have not.
So it's kind of one of those. I'll call it a cult classic. Ben Affleck's in it, but he's not really the major character. Giovanni Ribisi is the main character, if you know who that actor is. And there's a scene where so the Boiler Room is like they're pitching like pump and dump stocks. So it's like they're selling the worst, stocks out there. They're selling penny stocks. They're really like scamming people. But they're all about cold calling people, and like they have to make this sale, like a telemarketer. But there's a scene where like someone from the New York Times calls him to try to get him a subscription, and he kind of like gives them the thing like, you have to like he tries to like teach them how to pitch to him, because the guy's trying to like say, do you want a subscription of the New York Times? And it's every one of those phone calls they say like someone wins and someone loses. Like the person who's pitching it wins, or the person who's getting pitched. And there will always be an excuse. Like someone will try to give you an excuse, and actually like when they give you an excuse is like an opening to then pitch harder, right? It's like, well, I don't have the time right now, or I mean, which is standard things, but like if you find a way that you can call someone's bluff if they don't have time, or they and you can meet them where they are, I guess, in some levels, and you can pursue them. It always feels great when you actually get that person that you always wanted on your show.
Yeah. Now, if somebody says I can't do it right now, reach out to me in 3 months. I put a reminder on my calendar and it's name. They said to reach out X number of months later. And so I got a reminder. I'll reach back out. I'll give you that break. But
Yeah.
it's definitely a learning experience. But I think that can be important for architects. Just, we go in to present projects, try to win projects. You're pitching yourself and your services. It's great practice. And we haven't touched on it yet, but
Sure.
you recently got elevated to fellow. So you are now an FAIA. And so what does being elevated to fellow mean to you? I know there's separate objects. I'm assuming your object's more related to your involvement with the AIA.
Yeah. So there's 6 objects. You kind of have to really be in it for them to maybe make sense, but in general, think of object 1 is about design, and so the people that get elevated in design are we'll say like the most well-known people that you might know. It's like I'm trying to think people like someone from like Ted Flay. I mean, they just won the gold medal, but people who like are national design award winners and people who constantly win that level are the ones who typically get elevated in design. So like they're more of like, think of your architects, I guess, right? Like the name brands. The next level or the next object is 2, which is more about practice. So you're a Gensler and you built this kind of brand name firm. I would say regardless of whether it's like has design, I mean, they all have design shop. Like it's not like the same level of high design, but like you can just build a great brand and build a great firm. That's kind of what object 2 is. If you build SOM, if you build Gensler, you build HOK. Object 3, which is what I went for, was it's called Led the Institute. So, or a related organization. So some people get it because they were like the leader of NCARB. Like so there's a whole alternative kind of volunteer path that you might know people who volunteer for NCARB. Well, there's like, you can have this whole leadership journey where you don't do hardly anything AIA, but you're there, you're doing licensing stuff. They have their own board, they have their own staff. It's an own organization. If you led NCARB, then you could become a fellow. But I got it, really from everything I'm just talking about with kind of leading the institute, with a couple of key highlights being like the past president of Pennsylvania. And so a lot of times if you've led a state organization, like the larger things, kind of scale up. So if you led a large city chapter, or you led a state, or you serve on the national board, those are all things that are like pretty good barometers about whether, you at least kind of achieved a certain level of status. Because there's always like positions you have to kind of get along the way, as we're talking about like the corporate kind of ladder climbing. But then connection and doing the YF, kind of the national level. And I also edited the College of Fellows newsletter for a couple of years. So I was kind of instrumental as part of their communication strategy on the heels of connection, and started kind of a pathway for other young architects to follow me. So every editor that has followed me has been like a YF alum. So it was a nice little kind of, I was glad that happened, right? So they didn't just kind of rubber band back to having a fellow do it. So like for years, it was a fellow doing their newsletter. They brought me in, and then ever since, it's been someone who's kind of graduating out of the YF leadership structure. So
yeah,
so I mean, all
and
these
a great way to connect young professionals up, even though they're graduating from the young professional forum. Like the growth into connecting to those leaders that are fellows is fantastic.
and that's we kind of, if I go back to like the special relationship the College of Fellows has with the Architects Forum, I don't know when it started officially, but had kind of become a pretty routine thing when I was serving on the AdCom, where we would have our AdCom included a liaison to the College of Fellows, and their structure is that kind of first year in, you're either, it's called the bursar, which is like their treasurer, or their secretary. So one of those, like they would alternate. And so one of those two people would serve as the liaison, and then they would always kind of go on to be the chancellor. So if you were on the YF for a couple of years, there's a good chance that you've been connected with and had the opportunity to meet, 5 or 6 chancellors of the College Fellows, which is like, it's not quite equivalent, but it's close to the equivalent would be like the national AIA president. So these are all people who are reached the upper echelons of kind of, the AIA society, and, are great advocates. So it was great to have that additional connection between, a kind of pipeline of young architects and College of Fellows, but they're also the ones that were always saying, try to like submit for this early, right? And there's a thread that if you, and I did the research a little bit only because someone pointed out to me, but I'm probably a handful of 12 to 15 people in the past 20 years who've been fellowed by 40. There's just, and I would say almost every single one of them was in the YF, with the exception of Pascal Sablon, who got it through the Whitney Award. So there's a very consistent theme that those who are in the YF and are connected and have access to these other leaders have a penchant for giving back, have a penchant for doing great things, are the ones who get elevated early, generally.
Yeah,
doesn't mean
I
you
know when
can't
I
do
first
another
started,
way,
like everyone I saw was like principal of a firm towards the end of their career is who I saw as fellows. And it wasn't until I joined Smith Group that I met a fellow in our Detroit office that's not a principal. And I saw she had FIAIA, and I'm like, how? Like, just who I have seen get elevated was all the more senior professionals about to retire. And so I was fascinated. I'm like, oh, I didn't realize that could happen. And then, just being more connected across the country and seeing other younger professionals get promoted to fellow is more refreshing. And it feels like you have more of a connection to that group. And it's not just the, more senior professionals. That is kind of how I saw it when I first started my career. So it's interesting how it has developed, and you even noting like, there's only a small few that have gotten fellow under 40, but there's still a good group of it, which I wouldn't have seen 5 years ago. I didn't even know that could happen.
There were a couple then, but it was still an even smaller group, right? So, and to the credit of the leaders of the College of Fellows, again, they are the ones really pushing. Like, I don't think there's anybody locally. I would say my sponsor might have done it, might have like thought about it, but thought about pushing me, but most of my nudging has been from like the College of Fellows leadership, very early on, like before I was even eligible, right? Type of thing. They said, start thinking about this, and you guys are, you're all going to get there because you're going to do great things, type of thing. Like, so it's a little bit of a cheerleader, but because they even mentioned that it was possible, I probably would have done this. Like, if I didn't have that connection, I probably wouldn't have thought about doing this. I probably, because you still have to put together an application, and it is as daunting as people might say, so there is like an inertia to getting started, but if I didn't have people saying you should do this and this is important, and or you have like, the goods, they call it, right? It's like it is still a kind of process where you might feel you're insecure about what you've accomplished. But if you have someone who knows fellows and who has seen a lot of applications, if they are the ones telling you, hey, you have a good shot, then it makes it worth it, right? Because no one wants to spend hours upon hours without thinking, is this a waste of my time? And so by having that encouragement and having that connection with the fellows, I think that it pushed me to do it early, and I felt that I was accomplished enough, right? People might say that they might think they haven't done enough, right? They have to do more, and it doesn't always work out that way, right? If you put things off too much, there's actually the chance that your story isn't as cohesive. And I would even, if we tie this back to like the beginning, is that now being on the other side of architecture, I might not be doing the same things that, again, make my kind of story as, I don't want to say as compelling, but it might not be as cohesive. And
yeah,
and the stuff I would do with Connection was starting to get a little kind of, while I still think is like some of the best content that's come out, it's now 10 years old almost. If I waited too long, I don't think I would feel like, and if it evolves and people forget the brand, it doesn't seem like it would have as much relevance if I did it in 10 years. And I might have missed my window. So there was an urgency that I felt, but also with like taking your tests. Like I was always one that I try to take my tests and get it out of the way at some level. Not even for like hey, I want to be licensed. It's like, I want to get this out of the way. I don't want to do this anymore. Because you might, have a life, as they say, life gets in the way, right? I know there's enough people who've had kids, got married, they were stuck in like their second or third test. And then they like, even now with the rolling clock done, it doesn't really matter. Like, you might not lose that test, but you still have to go take the rest of them.
Yeah.
And people don't, right? So I know people who, it takes sometimes 5-6 years or more to take those, to actually get licensed. And that was what I wanted to do. So, I mean, I didn't pull the Charlie Klecka. If you've heard that name, there's a guy, Charlie was the AIS president a couple of years ago, and interim, I think, was the AIS kind of CEO. He put together like a 7-in-7 campaign, I think, where he took 7 tests in 7 days and passed them all.
Ugh.
So
I
don't know.
I've known people to do that, and it just stresses me out.
So I mean, it's possible. That wasn't. I don't know how long it took to study and to study different types of materials to do that all in one shot. But there are people that have done it. I took about 1.5 years, but that was the thing that I really wanted to make sure that I got these out of the way. To me, that was the account, like, again, not even being able to call myself an architect. I just don't want to do these anymore. I want to be over. I feel like that was like some level of like, yeah, I want to do this. I want to do it once. Of course, that was the mentality. But then once the pomp and circumstance and you realize, what you did, it kind of hits you. It's still pretty humbling. I mean, I'm sure that's a common word people say, but I mean, to think that to get there at all is its own experience. To get there at 40 is another entirely.
Yeah, definitely. And I always like wrapping up my podcast with this final question, and it's, what advice do you have for young professionals just starting their career?
So I think I'll, maybe go back to what we talked about in the first run, and then maybe I'll start this again. That now it may not be the first thing you can do, right? I think because it still takes a little bit of capital But I do think that if you have the opportunity as an architect to do any sort of small development, I think that I think that it is worth doing, not only for the income possibility, but I'll say that I bought my first duplex at 26, and if you think you don't have enough money to do things, I mean, I didn't have any money then either, right? I mean, yes, I was not just out of college, but I'm 2.5 years out of college, maybe 3 at the time. And because it was actually on the heels of the Great Recession, there were a lot of incentives for first-time home buyers. And so there was actually a credit of, I think it was $8,000, a federal government credit for $8,000. And I did an FHA loan. And so I bought this, and I think after I got the credit back and I was able to kind of basically like finance all of my closing costs, it was like a $4,000 out-of-pocket investment. So
crazy.
That now things have changed. There is not cheap real estate like that. Where I got it was like almost in Center City, Philadelphia. It was like an absolute stunning location for when I was able to get it. But and I got a lot lucky, right? I mean, these are the kind of things that most people have to kind of pound the pavement to find deals, and have more capital, be more facile. People don't always like taking FHA loans because they're just more scrutiny. There's more insurance, or there's more inspection requirements. But I was able to do that and then get into, and then start. It wasn't quite a fixer upper, but I used that as a way to say, all right, I don't like the flooring, and so I did the work myself. I tore out the flooring and laid new floors. So I figured out how to do all that. I figured out how to tile a bathroom floor, tile a backsplash. Demo's easy. Demo's cheap, right? Demo's just labor. And so that program may not exist. You may not have, cheap enough real estate. You may have to get much more money up front. But if you can find a way to do some sort of real estate development, and this wasn't even development. This is just an acquisition. I mean, it was, but because it was a duplex, my first mortgage, 40% of that was covered by the rental property. And then I had I split the rest with a roommate. And so my kind of total cost, my out of pocket, sure, there's the risk that, we're going to lose a tenant or whatever else happens in 30 years. But I was living in a bi-level 2-bedroom apartment for less than what I could have rented at that time.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you start to look at how you could like do all those things while building equity in something that you could then sell, and when I did sell, it was a 6-figure profit. So it took 10 years, but if you think about making, us 2 years worth, whatever, like a year and a half worth of salary in one in one sale, the more you can do with that. And I probably didn't even do as much as I could have, right? If you really think about, you can get into that. And then if you build enough equity, you can pull out and use that as collateral to get your next property, or you could flip it earlier and use it. But I guess the point is that that little experiment, taught me enough about real, financing and how to get the first investment. Because I had a tenant, I learned about property management. I learned about, running a little business, while doing all this. So it was effectively a side business. And then I moved out, and it was a total rental property. Mm-hmm. And so you start to learn all these different aspects of how real estate works, which is the vast majority of the clients of architects. And so I know it's more residential, but if you work in residential and you have the opportunity to try this out, I think that you will understand your clients better. I think you'll understand what it means to, again, like have things rented, and what matters to renters and buyers, because you have to make decisions yourself. So if you can, if you can stand to buy a fixer upper, I mean, that's probably where the deals are, is like buy a shell, hire a contractor. These are skills that you probably, either if you don't have already, are things that will suit you well in the future, that if you want to, again, buy that shell, write a couple contracts, oversee them while they're doing the work. It's probably more of, again, a side thing, that if you can live somewhere else and develop this little thing, to me, that would be a great way to either get into a different, use those skills and get into a different career path, or just know that when you finish it, if you are just still in traditional practice, I think that, and you're doing residential work, I think you can understand your clients better. They may respect you more. I know I have one of the architects I work with does some development, and we often ask him what he did. Like there's that rapport, because you're more of a peer than just a service provider. So that's it's not easy to get started there. I mean, that's the kind of thing that if someone is truly interested, I could give whatever advice I have. If you have listeners who reach out to you, I mean, I can tell them a couple things to get them started. But I think there is a lot to be said about doing, designing your own work, buying your own stuff, using the skills that we have as architects, and expanding them, right? Because it's there for the taking if you can do this and grow that skill set. I think that other clients, again, even if you're in traditional practice, will appreciate what you can do with that. And if you want to get even the next level, I was thinking about this more lately, that I know architects don't always like to sell their stuff, sell house plans, call it. But if you think about, if you were to just, if someone were to buy a piece of land, design a house, and get it zoned, you can take it to different stages, right? But if you were to get it zoned, which is something that an architect absolutely has their kind of skill set to do, you've just made that piece of land more valuable for yourself using your own skills.
Yeah.
This might be a little more advanced than someone just starting out, but if you think about how do you get there? How do you get to buy it? And you can take a mortgage out on a piece of land. It's a little harder, but if you were to say, let's say a piece of land is $50,000, you could probably find a bank that would finance it for you for 10, right? So if you feel that you can scrape together $10,000 to buy a plot, and then do the incremental costs to get a zoning permit, you could probably sell that for $75,000. Just the fact that someone else is entitled something for you, makes it more valuable. And so, and you could even maybe go the next phase and build get a set of building permits. Again, not that much cost to do the actual process of getting the permit, and all generally within the realm of the skill set of the architect. Now you can sell a set of, I have this set of plans that is fully permitted, ready to go. These things trade hand all the time. And if you're comfortable doing that and designing your own thing, you could call it an unbuilt work. As you build your portfolio, you design the house, and then if someone buys it from you, there's a chance it's going to get built, and you actually would probably make more money than if they just paid you as the architect to design it, which is kind of a sad state. But if you did those couple of things, it's a different business model, right? But you're doing what's kind of called, or it's not quite horizontal development, but doing things that are from an entitlement only and then selling them off is a style of development, and is much less risk. You don't actually have to take out the construction loan to do the work, right? So, so that, I would say that is one piece of advice. There might be other things that I'm not into AI, so I don't really know what opportunities lie there that if you switch into that. But I think that if you were to get into some form of development, I don't think that's going to go away. I think that there's always going to be an opportunity there if you can find the ways to score some deals and get, whether it's passive income or a couple of windfalls by selling some things.
Yeah, and just keeping your eyes open. Like, even if there's not something right now, you never know when the government's going to issue some kind of grant that you were able to take advantage of, and you never know when a property is going to go on sale. Like, just kind of keeping your eyes open to the possibilities and being able to diversify yourself, I think is great advice.
And RFPs, I mean, I know that like there are, I guess Philadelphia is a little hard at the moment, but like, different cities might issue an RFP to do like affordable housing, say. And again, it may be more on the finance side, but if you can put together a compelling design about why this should happen, sometimes the money will find its way in.
Yeah. And I will leave your LinkedIn account in the show notes. So if anybody has any questions for you on trying to find their first property, they'll know who to go to. But thank you so much, Jeff.
Great. Yeah. You're welcome.
I hope you enjoyed our discussion today. Learn some advice to take with you and see how our industry is all tied together to create the world around us. Check out the description below for any links or resources we discussed. If you liked the episode, please do me a favor and hit the subscribe button. Give me a thumbs up and leave a comment below. It really helps others be able to discover this resource and support finding that career path that best works for them. If you know someone that has inspired your own career that you'd like me to interview, let me know in the comments below, or you can reach out to me via my website or LinkedIn. I'd be happy to share their story or your own. Thank you again, and I cannot wait for the next career story I get to share with you next week.